Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, May the 25th, 2021. And the theme of our show today is drama queens. So let's start with a drama queen who is actually a man. He's called Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. And he gave another interview to Oprah Winfrey. His new Apple TV series, The Me You Can't See. Yes, this is a man who is constantly demanding privacy while spilling out his guts constantly. As predicted by me, this interview was Prince Harry telling the world yet again how sad he is because his mother, did you know that his mother was the Princess of Wales? And that she died in an automobile accident 24 years ago? Yes, of course, everyone knows that. 24 years ago. But he's still milking it. And this show, which is, I believe, executive produced by Prince Harry and his wife, Meghan Mertz, is all about famous people talking about how sad they are because of childhood trauma. The website Harry Markle writes, the overhyped Apple TV series, The Me You Can't See, that has been a work in progress for nearly 3 years, was finally aired on May the 21st. This was a day after the Dyson report was released, official confirmation that the BBC Panorama interview used unethical methods to secure the Diana interview back in 1995. And guess what? Harry did mention the trauma of his mother's funeral, but also played his tabloid victim card again. There have been mixed reviews on the show, for this is a sensitive topic which needs to be handled carefully. And there are 5 one-hour-long episodes that follow the stories of various people who might need therapy and healing for them too. However, one should question whether vulnerable people should open up publicly if they are susceptible to relapse. Naturally, there are sad faces and tears hugging therapy, and someone says that there is a place, a farm, for broken people. You know, not all broken people can be fixed, and some don't want to be fixed either. So one must be realistic when discussing such topics. I don't quite know what the purpose of this series is, whether it's to hear some firsthand experiences and how they coped with their mental health issues, or whether it's a platform for Oprah Winfrey and Harry to be armchair experts through experience, lived experience, doubtless, to tell the audience what mental health trauma is, and to be examples of how you can survive with therapy, but you can without therapy too. The usual disclaimer is posted beforehand with a website address with some resources. However, that was only set up 5 weeks ago, and much of what Harry said seemed to be recent, so why did this project take so long to finish? There seems to be a token numbers to call in various countries, but no website links, which makes it look like a sop to post something in a hurry. Didn't one of the experts tell them that people with mental health issues are less likely to call a number and speak to a stranger than to go to a website for information and perhaps have a web chat with a volunteer? The episode begins with Harry in therapy with Oprah Winfrey. And first off, they both appear to give the impression that they are experts, with Harry stating 99.9% of the world will have suffered some grief, loss, trauma, or depression after COVID-19. I never know where Harry plucks their figures from, but I know it shows a high degree of arrogance to make such open and bold statements. I wonder if he knows that the Sussex antics have probably contributed to the higher number of people exhibiting mental health issues. Oprah Winfrey and Harry seem to have scripted their one-liners, passing them off as gems of their perceived wisdom, but they sound affected, disingenuous, and can be a little dangerous when disseminated among the vulnerable. Harry fidgets and at times looks comfy in Auntie Oprah's armchair therapy session, because that's what it looks like as Harry releases in a rather irritated and hostile manner on how he loathed and hated being a member of the royal family, and that he had panic attacks and that he felt helpless. Harry is let loose to rant and rave with Oprah's leading questions, but a trained therapist would control things because it's not about releasing the anger and throwing plates. Again, this looks irresponsible and unsafe. So we find out that Harry is not only sad, terribly, terribly sad, but also angry. terribly angry as well, angry with the whole world. Well, at least everyone in the royal family, in particular his father, who he lambasted for the sadness of his own childhood, saying that Prince Charles didn't know any better because his father, the recently deceased Prince Philip, sent him to Gordonston, a famously tough public school. In the course of this interview, as been pointed out by many people, Prince Harry managed to give Meghan Mertz all the ammunition she would need for a whacking divorce settlement. He talked about his use of drugs. He talked about his heavy drinking. He talked about his anger problems. Not wise. Not wise. And we get to hear about Meghan Mertz threatening to commit suicide again. And with all of this talk about bullying, no one seems to have pointed out that this is the go-to bully maneuver for women. If you don't do what I say right now, I will kill myself. Only very bad people do that. Harry Markle continues that Oprah asks when he began therapy, and he says it was 4 years ago. Yet he has stated before that he had therapy 8 years ago at a JP Morgan conference. And in other interviews, he has stated that he had therapy for 12 years after his mother died. And it was also published that he had undergone therapy and treatment when he was caught taking drugs when he was 16 years old. It seems Harry can't keep to the truth when he is given a script that attempts to make, a savior. TW appear to be a savior. The wife, that would be a TW. It could be that Harry has told so many stories about his sadness and grief that he can't keep them straight anymore. Here's a funny bit from it. Then there are the more inconsistent statements with the first words of the child, known as Archie, and Harry is simply sounding idiotic now. Among the first words have been crocodile, mama and papa, and now Grandma Diana. I'm sure there are many child experts out there that confirm that it's unlikely Grandma Diana would have been uttered as a first word, as both words have 2 syllables, and a child would have had to have been coached with words that they hear all the time. It simply sounds like a convenient story to rally the cult. Of course, last week as well, Prince Harry said that he'd never heard of he didn't know anything about America's First Amendment to the Constitution, but that apparently he'd been looking into it and it was bonkers. So Harry seems determined to make himself as hated in the United States of America as he now is in Britain. And let's go to another drama queen. That would be American Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who says, this is according to the Citizen Free Press, she says that she is in therapy as a result of the January 6th Capitol breach, or what she described as an, quote, all-out attempted coup that had a lot of us, especially Latino communities, in a very reactive mode, unquote. I can't imagine why she would believe that the events of January 6th would particularly affect Latino communities. But of course, she is Latino, and everything that happens in the United States is all about her. Speaking to the radio show Latino USA, the Democrat said that U.S. lawmakers effectively, quote, served in war, unquote, and explained that she took some time after the event. She confided in fellow squad member, Representative Ayanna Pressley, who told her that she needed to recognize, wait for it, trauma. Recalling the event, Ocasio-Cortez described how former Vice President Mike Pence was taken out of the chamber a mere minute before these terrorists, insurrectionists, got into the Senate chamber. 60 seconds could have meant potentially the difference between what we have right now and a martial state. She continued, this was an all-out attempted coup. Yes. She wasn't in the Senate building. No, she wasn't there. But she previously said that Ted Cruz tried to get her killed that day. Served in war. Oh, perhaps a special kind of medal can be minted for her. That she was several hundred yards away from people entering the Capitol building. Yes, and a laptop was stolen, and apparently some chairs were knocked over. Let's see. AOC has more to say. This is from Hannah Blow at a Breitbart. And I feel like I learned this the hard way after my father had passed away when I was a teenager. Do you think that she's channeling Prince Harry here? This happened at a young age and I locked it away. You have to live for it for years, she continued. Oh yeah, I'm doing therapy, but I've also just slowed down. I think the Trump administration had a lot of us, especially Latino communities, in a very reactive mode. She said, I thought I was going to die, and criticized those who sought to move past that day. They're trying to tell us to move on without any accountability, without any truth-telling, or without confronting the extreme damage, loss of life, trauma. The reason I say this and the reason I'm getting emotional, what, you, AOC, getting emotional, is because they told us to move on, that it's not a big deal, that we should forget what happened, or even telling us to apologize, adding that those are the, quote, tactics of abusers. So AOC apparently doesn't know about the dozens of people who are being held in solitary confinement in Washington, D.C. jails for the crime of trespassing. Oh, I thought I was going to die. I've never been quieter in my entire life. That must have been a relief for those around her. Let's have a look at the chat. Chogokin666 says, don't other the marginalized. Hello to Palcasso88, Anrun, Roulette Cracked. Wallowing in self-pity, putrid wretch, says Roulette Cracked. Yes, apparently there's a stigma around the subject of mental illness. Is there now? If there's such a stigma around it, why won't anyone shut up about it? Yes, I understand that, losing one's mother at such an early age would be difficult. But again, this did happen 24 years ago. And it is indeed disgusting to see this man milking this for money, because that is what he is doing. Hello to Head McNeck and to Random Number Generator. Buddy says, Kevin, good evening from partly sunny Midwest USA. Play ball. My son is in a hitting slump currently. Sad to hear that. Matthew Gubbin says, we all thought Megan Mertz was the narcissistic grifter, but I guess it was Harry. Harry is the next Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil, for all his faults, is an intelligent man, and no one has ever accused Harry of being intelligent. Oh, here's the latest from People magazine, or NEPAZ, as it's known in the gossip community. Prince Harry says Meghan Mertz cried before Oprah interview aired because of UK media smear campaign. I held her, we talked, she cried, and she cried, and she cried. Prince Harry recalled in his new docuseries, The Me You Can't See. What is the me that you can't see of Prince Harry? She said that, yes, it was about being real, being authentic, and hopefully sharing an experience that we know is incredibly relatable to a lot of people around the world, despite our unique, privileged position. Yeah, well, the problem of making confessions all the time is this becomes devalued and ultimately worthless. Days before the interview was set to air, The Times claimed that the Duchess of Sussex faced a bullying complaint made by one of her close advisors during her time as a working royal at Kensington Palace, something her office has strongly refuted. No, not strongly refuted, strongly rebutted or strongly denied. Let's see. I suppose I'm being a pedant in objecting to this misuse of the word, but there you go. The Duchess is saddened, again with the sadness, by this latest attack on her character, particularly as someone who's been the target of bullying herself and is deeply committed to supporting those who have experienced pain and, wait for it, trauma. It has long been my belief, sincerely, that mental illness is a communicable disease. And then with that in mind, Let's move on to Demi Lovato, who apparently is a singer of some sort. This is from Cassie Carpenter at the Daily Mail. Complimenting someone on their weight loss can be as harmful as complimenting someone on their weight gain. Pansexual pop star Demi Lovato advises against commenting on other people's bodies. Two-time Grammy nominee Demi Lovato, who came out as non-binary last Wednesday, asked their woke fans on Saturday to no longer comment on their body in the future. I don't know who needs to hear this, but complimenting someone on their weight loss can be as harmful as complimenting someone on their weight gain in regards to talking to someone in recovery from an eating disorder. The 28-year-old pansexual pop star, who has 213.7 million social media followers, wrote via Insta story. If you don't know someone's history with food, please don't comment on that body. Because even if your intention is pure, it might leave that person awake at 2 a.m. overthinking that statement, or you could just stay off social media. Demi, who was born Demetria, continued, does it feel great? Yeah, sometimes, but only to the loud-ass eating disorder voice inside my head that says, see, people like a thinner you, or if you eat less, you'll lose even more weight. But it can also sometimes suck, because then I start thinking, well, damn, what did they think of my body before? Moral of the story, I am more than the shell for my soul that is my body, and every day I fight to remind myself of that. So I'm asking you to please not remind me that that is all people see of me sometimes, to the extent that people who are not addicted to social media give any thought at all to Demi Lovato. Speaking of bullying, Megan Mertz has been accused of being a bully in her childhood, and I well believe it. And you must have seen this, listeners and viewers, that it turns out that a great many of the people who carry on against bullying, Chrissy Teigen is another name that comes to mind, are in fact bullies themselves. Lovato's statement came a month after their Karen-like diet food war against LA frozen yogurt shop, The Big Chill, which triggered their eating disorder. My intentions were not to come in and bully a small business. That was not it, the Dancing with the Devil star explained of their April 18th outburst. Yeah, see, what happened was she patronized this yoga shop, and she went to it and found that they offered a variety of menu items, which could be characterized, I suppose, as low calorie. And this resulted in a furious diatribe from her against this small family-owned business along the lines of, how dare you? I walked in and got so triggered, I left without froyo, and it made me really sad. That's all it was, and I wanted to talk about that. Yeah, so this is worthy of a Goya. The day that Demi Lovato left the yogurt shop without her froyo. Demi will next discuss mental health issues with Glenn Close and moderator Anderson Cooper on Sunday night at 5 p.m. PST through Bring Change to Mind. And Lovato is so honored to join Brandy Carlisle and HER to perform a tribute to Icon Award winner Elton John at the 2020 iHeartRadio Music Awards, which airs Thursday on Fox. Oh, could any of this have to do with promoting her latest album? Apparently, Glenn Close was a member of a religious cult when she was a child. What are we talking about? 50 years ago here? And apparently she feels the need to talk about this to millions. The Demi Lovato story gets even better. There was a piece that appeared on Blind Gossip yesterday called "Do Not Look at This Pizza." A while back, we received a request from a singer. They wanted us to change our content. In particular, they asked us to not mention food or post photos of food ever. They said that when they read descriptions of food or see photos of food on our site, it triggers their eating disorder. Therefore, we should modify our content to accommodate them. They seem to have a particular problem with fast food. They wanted us to remove the post, "Your TV show is a hamburger," which shows this image of a McDonald's hamburger and French fries. They also wanted us to modify the post, "She was swirling in Vegas," which shows a soft serve ice cream cone. Those are just a couple of examples. Now, we are not sure if they just targeted us or if they sent similar emails to others trying to control them as well. Perhaps those emails went something like this. "Dear Mad Men, I'm trying to quit smoking and your show is triggering me. I demand that you remove all smoking scenes from future broadcasts of Mad Men. Dear Amazon, I am upset by my inability to manage my weight, and the fact that you sell bathroom scales is very triggering for me. Please remove all bathroom scales from your website immediately. Dear Budweiser, I am a recovering alcoholic and your products trigger me. You must stop selling your products anywhere in the Los Angeles area." Blind Gossip concludes, "Seriously, though, this singer, who has multiple personal problems, goes around telling people and businesses that they only should say or only do or think or sell what our singer deems acceptable. The singer seems to think that it's reasonable for them to demand that the whole world revolve around them. Control issues, entitlement issues, mental issues, their behavior is both weird and fascinating." So just seeing images of food triggers Demi Lovato. Well, then I guess that she's not going to be able to read any magazines, or I guess she's not going to be able to watch television or movies or step outside her home because there are people eating in public everywhere. I wonder if she goes up to them and starts ranting against them. Let's go back to the chat. Chogokin666 says, "Sad Prince is sad." Oh, yes. What else did Harry say? Oh, apparently the Princess of Wales was dating a person of color. Is that how Egyptians describe themselves? Of course, we know that the Princess of Wales died because she wasn't wearing her seatbelt and because the car was being driven by someone who was falling down drunk. Very foolish thing for her to have done. Remarkably, the one passenger in the car who was wearing his seatbelt survived the accident, which to me is quite a testament to the, how would I say, the safety features of a Mercedes Benz. "Left without froyo," says Steve. "This is worse than the Holocaust." Don Willis says, "Demi Lovato is the creation of all things internet, plain and simple. This is who your daughters aspire to be. Congrats." "The only food I'm addicted to or eating are Bologna sandwiches," says Jay Miller. I don't know what that means. Demetria, that is the name of the actress, Demi Moore, as well. The story that I heard was that Demi Moore's mother named her after her favorite hair care product. That's the story that I heard. "Demi Lovato sounds like a congenital bone ailment," says Chogokin. The 666 roulette crack says Froyo cost. This is a serious point. This is who your daughters aspire to be. Now, Demi Lovato is a singer, and she has brought out a few albums, and she has one out, in the last month or so. But her music is not intrinsic to her celebrity. And you see that with all the celebrities. They are literally famous for being famous. I mean, Madonna's still a celebrity. What is she, 62 years old now, trying to look like she's 25? I don't know many people listen to her music anymore, but obviously she's going to be a celebrity long after people have stopped listening to her music. Palpcasso88 says Amy Schumer's bathroom scale is made of kryptonite. Well, there's another woman who is, she has suffered so much. Apparently, they've all suffered so much. They're all so tired just all so tired. I don't really think they're all that tired if they are on social media constantly, sending pictures, publishing pictures, sending demands, sending insults, bullying other people. Quachalango says, take to the axe to the TV. Well, I mean, the TV is the internet now, and vice versa. Half Galician says, Demi Moore, one of the sexiest Hollywood stars ever. Yeah, she got a boob job, which was a mistake. Also, I learned how she got that sexy voice by screaming until she had ruined it. Yes, I felt rather differently about her voice after hearing that. Let's hear from another person suffering trauma. Another prima donna, a woman that I had not heard of until, well, today. This is a story from The Guardian. Britain's youngest MP to take time off with post-traumatic stress disorder. Was there an insurrection attempt at the House of Commons? Have these people even been showing up in the House of Commons? PTSD. The number of people who claim to suffer from PTSD, well, in America alone, must be in the tens of millions. Nadia Whittome, Labour MP for Nottingham East, says she had been battling persistent health issues. Britain's youngest MP has signed off work for several weeks on the advice of her doctor after being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. You're hearing more and more of this. You're seeing more and more of this behavior from politicians, particularly female politicians. Effectively, she's saying she cannot do her job, in which case she should resign. Nadia Whittome, 23. 23. Yes, that's definitely the people we want in charge. 23-year-olds. Who has represented Nottingham East in the Commons since 2019, said she had been battling some persistent health issues for several months, and that while she had been attempting to manage them alongside her duties as a politician, it had recently become clear that this is not feasible. The Labour backbencher said that despite 1 in 4 people experiencing a mental health problem each year, there is still a great deal of shame and stigma. She said she hoped that by being open about my own mental health, others would feel able to talk about theirs. Oh, boo, groan, hiss. Let me talk to you about my pain. Yeah. Is that the basis of all conversations now? The decision was incredibly difficult to make, Whittome admitted, but she said her constituents could continue to contact the fantastic staff working in her office as normal. I cannot wait to come back to the job I love, representing the community that means so much to me, the MP said in a Twitter message posted a Tuesday morning. She received support from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and from former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, as well as the deputy leader, Angela Rayner, who sent love, solidarity, and strength, and said that even by just publishing this statement, you've shown so much bravery, and you have helped so many other people. No, she is not helping other people. She is making other people's lives worse. Yes, a woman, or a man for that matter, decides, oh, yes, I have some personal problems. There are things that are troubling me, and this is so paralyzing that I have to get a doctor's note and not go to work. Whittome, a former care worker and a hate crime project worker, was described as one of Labour's brightest new talents by the Shadow Environment Secretary, Luke Pollard. He said, she is brave and courageous. She has my full support and best wishes. Her transparency was praised by the chief executive of a leading mental health charity. Mark Winstanley of Rethink Mental Illness said the enduring stigma surrounding mental health in the workplace can be hugely damaging, preventing people from accessing support and leading them to prioritize work over their own well-being for fear of judgment. Being signed off from work for poor mental health is not a sign of weakness, but a recognition that well-being should always be a priority. We welcome Nadia's openness around her diagnosis and wish her well in her recovery. Well, I can speak, we're not giving too much away. I can speak from personal experience where there have been times in my life where I have been sad, distressed because of personal issues, and I felt grateful for my job because it kept me busy and kept my mind off my personal problems. What more do we know about this remarkable, so very brave woman, Nadia Whitcomb? She was elected at the age of 23. This is from Wiki, and became the baby of the house as the youngest MP. She is a member of the Socialist Campaign Group. Her Punjabi Sikh father emigrated to the UK from Banga, India at the age of 21. He first worked in factories and as a miner before giving immigration advice and running a shop. Her mother is an Anglo-Indian Catholic solicitor and former member of the Labour Party. She grew up in a single-parent household with a brother. She attended a private school in Nottingham and later West Bridgford School, an academy school. She says she first became interested in politics in 2013, which was 8 years ago when she was 15, due to the effects of the bedroom tax and austerity on her local community. She worked in the constituency office of the Member of Parliament. Of course she did. She was a backroom girl. For Northwest Durham Palglass, Shadow Minister of State for Europe, during the 2016 European Union referendum campaign. She completed an access course at Nottingham College and law at Nottingham University for 2 years before dropping out for financial reasons. Prior to her election, she was a National Committee member of the pro-Remain organizations Another Europe is Possible and Labour for a Socialist Europe. She decided that she wasn't going to take her salary, which is £79,000 a year. She was only going to keep 35. Solidarity with the poor, something like that, and give the rest to a charity. In February 2020, Whitcomb organized a letter signed by 100 MPs demanding that foreign-born offenders not be deported back to Jamaica, because that's exactly what England needs, is more Jamaican criminals resident there. She describes as queer because, of course, she does. Yes, this is exactly the sort of person that goes into politics now, that seems to dominate the world. The monstrous regimen of women. And let's go back to the chat. I don't have particularly anything against this woman. Well, kind of, I suppose I do. But she can't do her job. If she can't do her job, it is time for her to resign and let her seat be taken by someone who is up to the job. And when you are an opposition MP, particularly when you're not a member of the shadow cabinet, this is one of the easiest jobs on earth. You pretty much vote how you are told to. You have people who deal with your constituents every so often. You do what is called a surgery, that you show up and you pretend to care about their complaints, but it is a spectacularly easy job. Adam says, that's like saying mental illness is not a sign of illness. Well, again, one in five, was that the figure mentioned? One hears figures of, 1 in 2 or even higher. And again, if so many people suffer from mental illness, then what's special about it? It's just normative, isn't it? Gamian says, saw a recent video for New York City, saw lots of maskless people on the street. I was shocked. Are you seeing people ditching masks? The last time I paid attention, a couple of days ago, I was distressed to see that about 1/4 of all the people I saw on the streets wearing masks. Okay, Don Willis says, I would gladly give up connectivity and KMG chat to go back to the pre-internet times. Maybe I could have discussions with people and actually look them in the eyes instead of people bumping into me. Visionary Companion says, the offspring of a Sikh father and of an Anglo-Catholic mother, was raised in a single-parent home. Why is this not a surprise? Roulette Cracked says, when I was on Twitter, I asked a female politician to name her greatest accomplishment as a politician, and she blocked me. Female politicians, they talk a lot about bravery now, and bravery has nothing to do with accomplishments anymore. Basically, it has to do with people talking about how brave they are and being complimented for how brave they are. The notion of a pregnant woman publicly boasting that she was threatening to commit suicide and thus kill not only herself but her child, I think is absolutely disgusting. But now it is brave and courageous. Fully paid sick leave disorder, says a Roulette Cracked. Okay, let's talk about a different subject now. I hope I don't get into trouble for this, but now that Dr. Fauci is talking about it, I suppose it will be acceptable for me. This is from Courtney O'Brien at Fox News. This time last year, the mainstream media largely dismissed the Wuhan coronavirus lab leak theory as a fringe or conspiracy theory. But with Dr. Anthony Fauci becoming the latest leading figure to question the origins of COVID-19, outlets are increasingly treating it as a serious possibility. A few examples of how the media were reporting on the lab leak theory a year ago, when Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican of Arkansas, suggested it had emerged from a lab known for bat coronavirus experiments. Senator Tom Cotton repeats fringe theory of coronavirus origins, the New York Times wrote. Trump says investigating whether coronavirus spread after China lab mishap, but cites no evidence. A USA Today article read, new research explores how conservative media information may have intensified the severity of the panic, the Washington Post wrote. There were more from where those came from, noted conservative writer Drew Holden in a lengthy thread about the media's fluctuating tone. Oh, Oliver Darcy, yes, one of my favorites, panic mongers. This was from March the 28th of last year. Here's how to debunk coronavirus misinformation and conspiracy theories from families and friends. Holden wrote, NPR might have been the most dismissive, running stories on back-to-back days suggesting there was nothing to the allegations and that scientists debunked and dismissed the idea of an accidental release. They were, in retrospect, entirely wrong, but memory hold these pieces. Politico referred to the lab leak as a conspiracy theory before wondering why more research hadn't been done on lab experiments, an editorial phenomenon that Holden described as amnesia. This story, which he links to from Politico, is precisely the type of amnesia that infects reporting like this. 2 months ago, they were lamenting how warnings and concerns about bat research had been ignored. A year before that, they chalked concerns about the Wuhan lab up to conspiracy theory. Oh, and let's get back to Dr. Fauci. From CNN Politics, May of last year, Anthony Fauci just crushed Donald Trump's theory on the origins of the coronavirus. And here we have the latest from the good doctor. Are you still confident that it developed naturally? Fauci was asked. No, actually, Fauci responded. He's quite the weather vane, isn't he? Even Anthony Fauci, the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and perhaps the single most prominent doctor in the world at the moment, Chris Cillizza, wrote at the time, in an interview with National Geographic posted Monday night, Fauci was definitive about the origins of the virus. Yes. If you look at the evolution of the virus in bats and what's out there now, the scientific evidence is very, very strongly leaning toward this could not have been artificially or deliberately manipulated. Everything about the stepwise evolution over time strongly indicates that this virus evolved in nature and then jumped species. Having quoted both men, Cillizza added, only one of these is a world-renowned infectious disease expert, and it's not Donald Trump. But Fauci said over the weekend that he is not convinced the coronavirus developed naturally. Yes, I wonder what could have led to this change of heart. Did Fauci, between his, hundreds of media interviews every month, spend many hours poring over scientific papers? I rather doubt it. Glenn Greenwald tweeted, major media outlets spent a year demonizing the lab leak theory as an insane conspiracy theory. Fact checkers pronounced it false. Those suggesting it were banned online on grounds of disinformation. Mainstream outlets are now forced to admit its viability. Any accountability? Silly Glenn. There's no accountability for members of the media. And I think that Glenn Greenwald knows that. Of course, he's written about it at considerable length. So let's rub it in, because we don't get very many opportunities to do that with prominent members of the media. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Washington Post journalist Glenn Kessler is facing ridicule after reporting that the lab leak origin of COVID is now credible, having previously attacked Senator Ted Cruz for saying the same thing. Back in May 2020, Cruz responded to Kessler's assertion that the lab leak theory was doubtful by accusing the news outlet of abandoning all pretenses of journalism to produce CCP propaganda. Kessler responded by accusing Cruz of missing, quote, the scientific animation in the video that shows that it is virtually impossible for this virus to jump from the lab, or the many interviews with actual scientists. We deal in facts, and viewers can judge for themselves, unquote. A tweet from Kessler has come back to bite him in light of him now admitting and being fully ratioed on Twitter as a result that the lab leak origin suddenly became credible. And here's a piece from the Washington Post today, fact checker. Timeline, how the Wuhan lab leak theory suddenly became credible. Suddenly? How exactly could that happen? Has there been some sort of bombshell news release? Have there been confessions from people at the lab? No. It's just a shift of the wind. It didn't suddenly become credible. It was always credible, responded Donald Trump Jr. It literally always made the most sense. I understand the desired narrative media always wanted, but didn't anyone think the most likely scenario was the virus magically originated feet from the lab that worked with it? Of course, yeah. Oh, but we know who's ultimately to blame for this confusion. Not white supremacy. Not exactly. No, it's Donald Trump. Because, of course. Mais oui. Trent Baker at Breitbart writes, Monday on CNN's New Day, New York Times White House reporter Maggie Haberman weighed in on the mounting evidence that suggests COVID-19 originated at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Dr. Anthony Fauci even said he is not convinced the coronavirus developed naturally after first pushing back against the theory. According to Haberman, former President Donald Trump and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo are to blame for the theory immediately being shut down by the media because they burned their own credibility over and over again. Quote, a lot of the discussion about the lab leak, I think, was clouded early on because there was a suggestion by some that it was somehow a Chinese weapon that caused this. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a lab accident, but we've come a long way from people dismissing this as a conspiracy theory to a lot of people taking this seriously, Maggie. Look, I do think it's important to remember that part of the issue when this first was being reported on and discussed back a few months after the pandemic had begun, then President Trump and Mike Pompeo both suggested they had seen evidence that this was formed in a lab, and they also suggested it was not released on purpose. But they refused to release the evidence showing what it was. So because of that, that made this instantly political, and Maggie Haberman wants us to believe that there is anything that Trump said or did, including raving about the taco bowls at the Trump Tower, could be anything other than political. Yes, see, it's Trump's fault for mentioning it. If anyone else had mentioned it, the media would have taken it seriously. No, they wouldn't have taken it seriously because the media is in love with China. And the media was perfectly willing to use China to hurt Donald Trump. More on China later. China and Hollywood later. This is from Human Events. Oregon will require proof of vaccine for maskless entry into businesses, work, and church. The Oregon Health Authority is requiring that people attending work, businesses, or religious institutions show proof of vaccination to be allowed maskless entry. I've been reading a lot about the possibility of people faking proof of vaccination, and I don't exactly know how anyone could protect against this. While it was expected to happen somewhere and sometime, Oregon is the first state to issue this guidance. Yes, burning down Oregon, not a problem. Going maskless, the biggest problem on earth. The state's health authorities updated their mask guidance May 19th following the CDC's rollback of mask mandates for vaccinated individuals. Businesses, employers, and faith institutions, must have a policy in place to check the vaccination status of all individuals before they enter their establishment. Businesses, employers, and faith institutions who do not create such policies will maintain the same masking guidance listed below, regardless of an individual's vaccination status. The policy is raising concerns for those who choose not to take the vaccine for whatever reason, including safety, side effects, efficacy, mistrust in pharmaceutical companies, and lack of full FDA approval. Yes, that's a fact that the fact checkers don't mention very often, that these drugs have not been fully approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Nathaniel Brown, a spokesperson for Oregon Business and Industry, told the New York Times that they have serious concerns about the practicality of requiring business owners and workers to be the enforcer. We are hearing from retailers and small businesses who are concerned about putting their frontline workers in potentially untenable position when dealing with customers. Well, that's one way to put it. And more on this subject. The Wall Street Journal seems to have taken a personal interest in this. This is from Tom Pappert at the National File. The Wall Street Journal is paying Twitter to promote an article that describes the need for vaccine passports to please airlines, who are apparently being deceived by large numbers of passengers presenting falsified proof that they received one of the COVID-19 vaccines. In a promoted post on Twitter, the Wall Street Journal declares that, quote, airlines are battling a scourge of passengers traveling with falsified COVID-19 health certificates, with test results easy to manipulate. Because of that, vaccine cards may be coming. In the article, it becomes clear the vaccine cards described by the Washington Post are the distrusted and often banned vaccine passports proposed by the Biden administration. The article, dated April 13th, is titled Fake 19 COVID Certificates Hit Airlines, which now have to police them. The article makes the case for universal COVID-19 passports to please airlines, who in turn must please international governments who are requiring proof of vaccination or proof that individuals do not have COVID-19 prior to entering flights. According to the journal, this constitutes a need for the highly partisan and extremely controversial vaccine passports. Previously, the Washington Post revealed that the Biden regime is working with top corporations in the private sector to develop a digital vaccine passport that must be presented on smartphones. What about those people who don't have smartphones? The Post explains that Biden and those around him want the vaccine passports to be entirely driven by the private sector, using large corporations to force private citizens to engage in their system of tracking in order to participate in the modern economy, rather than using the force of the federal government. Because you see, when private business oppresses people, it's not really oppressive. And if you complain about it, that makes you a communist. Or that's the line I certainly hear from the likes of David A. French. As mentioned previously, the COVID hysteria has been a boon time for God haters, particularly those who hate Christianity. Dr. Bruce Charlton writes on his webpage, charltonteaching.blogspot.com, freedom and protest here and now equals criminalization of Christianity. From my book, Addicted to Distraction from 2014, in the Global Totalitarian World from 2020, what applies to the mass media applies equally to government, corporations, and all bureaucratic institutions, including the main Christian churches, and all large-scale public campaigns and demonstrations, including those that self-present as oppositional and dissenting. The modern mass media only unleashes hype for bad things, for things destructive of traditional values or truth, beauty, or especially virtue. From the mass media perspective, therefore, that which is traditionally good is represented as bad, and vice versa. Yes, this is the inversion of values that the Hungarian philosopher Polanyi wrote about. Charlton continues, people and events are presented by the media as good are always in reality bad, and people or events presented by the media as bad are usually, but not always, good. And when bad people or events are not presented as good, then they are condemned as bad for the wrong reasons. Also, if genuinely good things happen to be presented as good by the mass media, then it will invariably be the case that they also are said to be good for the wrong reasons. Thus, the major output of the modern international mass media consists of only 4 categories. 1, good presented as bad. 2, bad presented as good. That is to say, simple inversion. 3, good presented as good for a bad reason. And 4, bad presented as bad for a bad reason. That is to say, explanatory inversion. These 4 categories, which can be summarized as either simple or explanatory inversion, account for all sustained and high-impact modern major mass media stories without any exceptions. The one I wish to draw attention to is 3, good presented as good for a bad reason. This I would apply to any movement advocating freedom, free speech, and free expression, and to any and all groupings with a negative agenda of anti-protest or resistance. The simple reason is that there is no neutrality in the modern world, so there is no freedom. And in the West, there is only the choice to follow or to oppose Jesus Christ. Anything which says it just opposes evil, which presents itself as a neutral good, anything which presents itself as merely permissive, asking for generic freedom, human rights for universal allowing, anything which is supposedly just common sense or pragmatism or decent, any and all such will, in practice for sure, whether immediately or soon, be differentially interpreted and differentially enforced against Christians and Christians only. So unless a group or movement or anything is explicitly really Christian and also explicitly repents and rejects all leftist projects, including all the litmus tests of, I'm not going to mention this word, anti-racism, climate environmentalism, social feminism, and the sexual revolution, unless this, we can be sure that the institution, group, movement, demonstration, protest is actually serving the enemy agenda, the demonic agenda, and is actually opposed to God, the creation, and the good. Here's a story from February from HuffPost. And I included this on my roster simply, as another example of let's talk about me. And have you heard of COVID-19? Boy, that sure is a bummer, huh? But then something weird happened. This is from Jill Hamilton, who is a sex writer. Here's her description on HuffPost. Jill Hamilton writes In Bed with Married Women, a blog about sex in all its boring, funny, weird, smoking hot glory. Her work has appeared in O, the Oprah magazine, Cosmopolitan, Rolling Stone, and Mad magazine. She looks grumpy in all photos, whether actually grumpy or just kind of neutral. You can follow her on Twitter, and I went to her Twitter account, and she looks like a very unpleasant woman indeed. And her piece is called I Sexted with a Bot to Quell Pandemic Loneliness. Whether this happened or not, who knows, but she is saying so, and HuffPost is reporting it, so it might as well be true. Getting ghosted wasn't a great way to start off a relationship, especially since that relationship was gonna be with a bot. My new would-be paramour, Slutbot, aka the cure for a mediocre love life, is a free virtual texting service I read about in Lindsay Goldwork's book, Bow Down, Lessons from Dominatrixes on How to Get Everything You Want. The idea is that it's a safe space to practice dirty talk, but if you must know, I wanted to go off label and abuse it as someone, or in this case, something, to sext with and please, oh please, brighten up the long quarantine days full of delightful family members, none of whom were, for better or worse, sexting me. What happened there? Something terrible happened with that paragraph. Full of delightful family members, none of whom were, for better or worse, sexting me. Is she implying or just stating that she sexts with family members? I suspect that she isn't. But again, editors have been determined a surplus to requirements. It was a lot to expect from a free service, but I'd been veering dangerously close to growing full Grey Gardens, and I need something. Grey Gardens is a reference to a famous documentary about two sisters who were related to the Kennedys somehow, who lived in a big old house that was falling apart. I entered my phone number into the website and got success. You will receive a test message within a few minutes. But I didn't. I waited. Maybe it was super busy at work, afraid of real intimacy. A couple days later, I told my friend Sandra about it. She said maybe it will ghost you, then come back in a few months all desperate for you. You'd be so into that. This was undeniably true, but still, I have decently low self-esteem, but it seemed unlikely that a bot would already be not that into me. So I entered my number again and got a text back immediately. It sounds like you are looking for some dirty talk, it began. I must have entered someone else's number and inadvertently sent a similarly worded message their way. Slutbot is very sex positive and consenty. It asked me what gender I wanted to be, what gender it should be, and assigned me a safe word, pineapple. Yes, I'll be sure to remember that. Slutbot asked whether I wanted it slow and gentle or too hot and sexy. I picked two. I'm not going to read any more of this. Here's a woman writing on the internet for the whole world to know that a bot, a computer program, rejected her sexually. Yes. Women posting their L's on the internet. I suppose another advantage of actually, reading from this story is just to let you know, in case you didn't know already, that the people who are on the other side from us, I don't really think that there can be any peace, because these people are, well, in no particular order, one, evil, and two, insane. It's one thing to do this, but of course it is another thing to boast of it. But I guess, we have to break down that stigma of people sexting with bots and then complaining about being ghosted. Let's go to lockdown skeptics. Why has the mortality monitor suddenly changed its baseline from the 10-year average to 2019, the lowest mortality year ever? Well, to ask the question is to answer it. Lockdown has tipped many into the category of problem drinker. The impacts could take years to repair. The Telegraph has published a harrowing report on the increase in the number of dependent drinkers as a result of lockdowns, which highlights the fact that while the amount of alcohol consumed in the UK decreased during the shutting down of regular life, the number of deaths from alcohol abuse reached a 20-year high. The physical and psychological impacts, it says, could take years for remedy. Well, why would the amount of alcohol consumed in the UK go down during lockdowns? Because the pubs were shut. So people who like to drink alcohol in convivial situations instead of, drinking alone at home had no place to go. The story says it was 2 months into the first lockdown when James Roberts, 45, received an ultimatum from his partner. Ever since he set up a travel firm, age 29, Roberts had used alcohol to self-medicate to control the stress that comes with running a business. His career took him to most countries in the world. Almost all of the trips involved heavy drinking, but his boozing worsened considerably after COVID hit last March. Cooped up inside his home in the Scottish Highlands and panicked about the economic climate, he turned to the bottle as a source of emotional pain relief. I just drank to drown out everything that was happening in the world. Roberts remembers it was almost like a numbing effect. Eventually, his partner told him to seek help or the relationship was under threat. Roberts was driven to Cheshire to start a 4-week residential rehabilitation program at Delamere Health Limited at a cost of £15,000. He hasn't touched alcohol since. Roberts now counts himself lucky with the steadfast support of his partner, as well as the funds to pay for professional help. He's firmly on the road to recovery. But not everybody is so fortunate. Doctors are becoming increasingly worried that 14 months of pandemic life have created a dark legacy of alcohol abuse. Well, overall alcohol intake decreased in the UK during each lockdown, probably because of the closure of pubs and restaurants. At the extreme end of alcohol abuse, the number of deaths shot up. And there is a piece from Toby Young here, why social media companies were wrong to muzzle lab leak theories. Toby Young says, I've written a piece for the Mail today on why it was wrong for YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter to remove content defending the lab leak theory and label it misinformation. Given that it's now entered the mainstream, one of the best arguments against censorship on social media is that the independent fact checkers the companies rely on to determine which points of view are respectable and which are conspiracy theories will inevitably make mistakes. And the transformation of the lab leak theory from fringe hypothesis to most likely explanation is a perfect illustration of this. In the bad old days, religion told people what was true and what wasn't true, and we've moved on from there because that is just plain stupid. Now social media companies tell us what is true and what is not true, and we are close to reaching a secular heaven because of this. Because these fact checkers, they are omniscient. Lockdown restrictions to come to an end in Israel from June, but they could return further down the road. Well, that's the nightmare, isn't it? William Briggs points out that flu has vanished. It's completely vanished. It vanished in 2020 and it's vanished in 2021. It's funny how that works, isn't it? I suppose this could be considered Donald Trump's greatest accomplishment. Professor Devi Sridhar, the chair of Global Public Health at the University of Edinburgh and a member of the Scottish Government COVID Advisory Group, said 2 months ago in a tweet that has since been deleted that the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine does not work against the South African variant. She now claims that the vaccine does work against variants and that we have to move away from harsh restrictions and lockdowns. So here's an expert who changed her mind. So it appears that science is constantly evolving, that it's not carved into stone. Yes, according to England, in England and Wales, fully vaccinated people will still have to self-isolate if they come into contact with COVID after June the 21st. And let's go to Alex Berenson's site. And that will be the last, hopefully the last I have to say on this dread subject today. Berenson writes, hey, Blue Checks, remember how you deleted your crazy apocalyptic predictions about bodies stacked like cordwood in Florida, Georgia, your red state of choice? Time to scrub the ones calling the lab leak a conspiracy theory. Quick like a bunny. Screenshots are forever. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Can we drop the gotchas? Looking back doesn't help anyone. We all know the Chinese screwed up. How is that my fault? I'm just a humble yet amazingly handsome and talented public servant. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Jerry Dunleavy tweeted, new. Fauci argued today that it would have been almost a dereliction of our duty if the NIH hadn't worked with China to study coronaviruses, as he defended National Institutes of Health money going to EcoHealth for collaboration with very respectable Chinese scientists. Berenson comments, St. Fauci must have been apprised of some emails he thought were deleted. Had simply forgotten writing. Yeah, let's take deadly diseases and make them deadlier and work out how they can be communicated from animals to people. This is quite literally insane. But the experts say that we must. Why? Why must me? Why? I mean, I'd like to hear a reason for this. Oh, because it would make us better. It would make us better able to combat the disease that was created in a lab. Gain of function, they call it. Today is okay. I'm going to go to the chat before I talk about the St. George Floyd Day. Dan says they design and implement hate crimes. Okay. Let's scroll down to the most recent. I was using that term back in March of last year. Body stacked like cordwood, you know. But my prediction remains true that the experts, no matter how many times they have changed their opinions, their guidance, their information as opposed to misinformation, no matter how many times they change it, no matter how much more that we learn, they're just going to pat themselves on the back and congratulate themselves for what an excellent job they did. Frothing Fanboy says, hi, Don Willis. I'm a woman and I don't even want to know what sexting is. I suspect the bot has something to do with robots, but I'm guessing here. Ghosting, a filthy act with a snowman? No, ghosting is a phrase that is very popular amongst the kiddies. And it means that a person, a man or a woman, expresses a romantic or sexual interest in you and then disappears. Just disappears. That person cannot be contacted. Okay. Roulette Crack says, Belgian Rambo saga? You probably understood that as an informant that would provide her with plausible deniability. What on earth are we talking about here? Okay. Yeah, I feel the need to talk about these nasty things because, people are doing them. That to the elite, these things are perfectly normal. That it should be, boasted about, particularly even your humiliation at being ghosted by a bot. Contracu says, chemsex is the new normal and cannot be stopped without infringing rights. In-person church service, on the other hand, is just too unsafe for now. Yeah. Okay. A few months ago, the government of British Columbia and our chief latrine wallet, Dr. Bonnie Henry, they sent out information about sex during COVID, and they commended the practice of glory holes. You can look it up if you don't know. It is absolutely disgusting. But this is the government telling us this. Sexual intercourse between a man and a woman, ooh, that's so problematic. But this other perversion, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Anran says gain of function really does sound sinister when you don't even know what it means. It does. It does. Gamma Young says, I suspect we'll be seeing many more people who can't say goodbye in person and ghost their former loves. Geez, he style says, ghosted by a bot, talk about having no game. Well, again, we have this phenomenon of people boasting, more and more women boasting. There was that Spectator article that I read, was it yesterday or last week? A reasonably attractive woman in her 30s was in effect boasting that despite all her activity on Tinder or whatever, with 20-year-old men in their 20s, she couldn't persuade any of these men to have sex with her. And of course, you find out a fact like this, and I guess she didn't really think this through about how damaging it would be to her reputation. Because essentially, she said in the article that she was offering consequence-free sex to these men, and they said no. So the obvious question that comes to mind is, well, what's wrong with her? There has to be something wrong with her. I mean, she doesn't look crazy, but, maybe she is crazy. So, on to American affairs. Given this is the first anniversary of the death of George Floyd, it got me thinking about Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was famous for her role in the Montgomery bus boycott. Her importance in American history has definitely been blown out of proportion. But I'm reminded that great care was taken in the selection of the woman to lead the bus boycott in Montgomery. That this woman had to be, blameless. She had to be, what they call now a role model. And so she was. But instead, now we have George Floyd, and President Biden met with the family of George Floyd, including the daughter that he never saw. He had two families, one of which, the first family, had been ghosted, you could say. Is this going to become an annual event? I saw it mentioned somewhere that apparently someone in the New York Times was suggesting that Memorial Day should be renamed George Floyd Day. George Floyd is not a suitable candidate to become a martyr, a hero, and I rather think that is why he was selected. Now, it's obviously it's accidental to a large extent. You don't know who's going to die in police custody, but he died, and he was not a good man. He was a criminal. He was a violent criminal. But they did it because they could. They could shove this down our throats, not just in the United States. Oh, the amount that we've heard in Canada about George Floyd. He wasn't Canadian, and he wasn't killed in Canada. And race relations in Canada are very different from those of the United States historically and in the present day. But that, of course, doesn't make any difference. Oh, you're talking about rubbing it in? This is from Mara Klecker at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Minneapolis police are bringing in outside help as they try to temper weekend violence that killed at least 4 people, including a college senior who was out celebrating graduation. Mayor Jacob Fry, speaking a day after the mass shooting downtown, said the city has asked state and federal agencies for assistance as Minneapolis police face a shortage of officers. How far down this story am I going to have to get before the reason for Minneapolis facing a shortage of officers is mentioned? Safety in our city has to be a priority, Fry said Sunday, calling the reinforcements really, really critical. Oh, was that the line he took when Minneapolis was sacked last year? No, not at all. He kneeled in solidarity with those who had sacked Minneapolis. And how many George Floyd funerals did he attend? He was seen weeping, kneeling beside the catafalque that contained Floyd's earthly remains. The weekend's victims, including 2 men believed to have been struck by gunfire on the north side, a suspected gunman in the mass shooting downtown that injured 8, and the college student whose family described as an innocent bystander. The increase in violence has tested the commitment of city leaders who promised unanimously to transform policing and public safety in the wake of George Floyd's death, but are deeply divided about how to proceed. While debates about policing have proved to be divisive within City Hall, some of the victims' relatives say they hope to remove politics from the discussion. They want a solution that will keep other families from feeling pain like theirs. University of St. Thomas senior Charlie Johnson was celebrating with friends on Saturday night when he was fatally hit by gunfire outside the Monarch nightclub in Minneapolis. And of course, many mass shootings in America over the weekend, and it hasn't really even begun to be hot. Here's a typical story. This is from NJ.com. 2 killed, 12 wounded in shooting at New Jersey house party. Now, we don't really know who was there, but there's a huge Black Lives Matter banner that was seen on the property. 2 people were killed and 12 others wounded in a shooting at a house party in Cumberland County No arrest has been made in the case. New Jersey State Police responded to a home in the 1000 block of East Commerce Street in Fairfield Township shortly before midnight to find a 30-year-old man and 25-year-old woman died of gunshot wounds. 12 other adults were struck by gunfire and taken to various hospitals. One of the 12 suffered serious injuries and is currently listed in critical condition. The gathering was a 90s-themed birthday party with attendees of all ages. Yeah. In so many of these mass shootings, we have the same story told over and over again. Many people know who the gunmen were, but they don't talk to the police because snitches get stitches. Even in cases where children have been shot, several children have been shot, they will not speak to the police. But apparently that is not as critical a problem as the fact, which the New York Times informs us, that support for Black Lives Matter has decreased rather significantly in the United States. It's all black background from the New York Times, so you know that it's terribly serious. Support for Black Lives Matter surged last year. Did it last? A series on George Floyd and America. George Floyd, greatest American of the 21st century. And yeah, a series. They're not kidding when they talk about a series. Here's some of the stories. William Barber II and Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove believe that the Trayvon Martin generation has come of age and is pushing the nation toward a third Reconstruction. Hakeem Jefferson and Jennifer Chudy, two political scientists, look at the charts that answer the questions: did George Floyd's death catalyze support for Black Lives Matter? If so, for how long and for whom? Elizabeth Hinton, a historian, writes that the history of Black rebellion demonstrates a fundamental reality: police violence precipitates community violence. If only those pesky police weren't sticking their nose in other people's businesses, no one would ever shoot anybody ever again. This is a disastrous message that the elite is sending to Black people in the United States. It is certainly not in their interests for them to go around blasting at each other, over trifles, and to be practically encouraged to do so. LeVar Stoney, the mayor of Richmond, Virginia, reflects on taking down the Confederate monuments that cast a long, dark shadow over our city. Talman Smith, a Times opinion editor, writes that the past year's racial reckoning was disproportionately experienced by privileged Americans. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? David W. McIver, a political theorist, recalls the wild swings between hope and anguish, possibility and anxiety of last summer's protests. Why did these people all write like women? 6 young Americans reflect on how the past year has changed them. I've been a lot louder these days. Well, that's good to know. 14 conservative voters discuss their feelings on race, politics, and why we are so divided right now. This is like one day of George Floyd coverage. So it turns out that white people and Hispanics are nowhere near as supportive of Black Lives Matter as they were a year ago. And has been pointed out in the comments section, the New York Times buried the data about Hispanics. It said, there's the graphs. It's all there in the graphs, but no, it's all the fault of white people. Okay, yes. I mean, how long before we are going to have professors in the United States, professors of George Floyd studies? Here's a story from Patrick Howley at the National File. Joe Biden and, I should mention that one of the comments or letters to the New York Times on that story about support for Black Lives Matter was from a white person who basically said, I'm sick of this. In the year since Floyd died, I have seen piece after piece after piece openly expressing hatred for white people. This fellow said he didn't think that he had done anything wrong and that this kind of talk was, how should we say, counterproductive. But meanwhile, let's hear from Naira. I don't know if that's properly pronounced. Naira Banks, who I believe is some sort of YouTube influencer. Oh, she's routinely praised for diversifying the beauty expert genre. She tweeted, "Why do white people hate saying, 'excuse me'? Laugh my ass off. It's so funny. I'll look someone dead in the face and wait for them to say it, and they just stand there nervously, looking like they're going to foul their pants, even if they bump into me. This is pure projection, of course." And then, out of nowhere, weren't y'all just violently protesting your rights to go to Disneyland last week? I don't recall that. This is all part of the fight against COVID-19. Fauci's efforts to appeal to the young people have been ham-handed at best, evidenced by his recent Sirius XM forum with 1990s rappers LL Cool J and DJ Jazzy Jeff. I don't know that very many black people under the age of 40 have heard of either of these two people. But got to get the influencers in there, the YouTube influencers. They are truly the leaders of the young generation. It's a curious story from London. This is from the Daily Mail. Now, Black Panther of Oxford, Sasha Johnson's political party, questioned claim that she was shot by a gang and slammed police who ruled death threats weren't credible without speaking to her. Sasha Johnson's political party, which is called the Taking the Initiative Party, are rejecting the idea that the Black Panther of Oxford was caught in a crossfire. The mother of two is fighting for her life following the attack in Peckham, southeast London, at 3 a.m. on Sunday. Scotland Yard is insisting that there is nothing to suggest the 27-year-old was the target of the shooting. The Taking the Initiative Party have slammed police claims that the threats against Johnson were not credible. Of course, no one had heard of this woman until the media decided to make her famous a year ago. So she went to this party, and I've seen pictures of the location. It does not look particularly salubrious, to put it mildly. But there was a statement in this story that took me aback. It really did. How can people be so obtuse? So an official statement from this party. Do the police know who the target of the attack was in order to conclude that Sasha wasn't? How does one manage to shoot someone in the head accidentally? Well, I'll explain, and this is really easy. What you do is you empty your pistol into a crowd, which is the sort of thing that happens dozens of times every week in the United States. You hear about innocent bystanders, and I guess you are going to hit a lot of innocent bystanders when you empty your pistol into a crowd. Yes, this woman came out of nowhere. She participated in the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020 in response to a far-right counter-protest with the stated intention of protecting war memorials, because it's only, of course, far-rightists, according to Wikipedia, who are in favor of protecting war memorials. Johnson told The Guardian we're painted as thugs when the real thugs are disguised as protecting those memorials. Okay. All right. Sasha Johnson has an interesting idea about segregation in Britain. She wants all of those people who've been accused of microaggressions to be segregated. According to the Mail, Johnson came to the prominence as an organizer of the BLM protests last summer, where she was seen addressing crowds while wearing camouflage trousers, a black beret, and a stab-proof style vest. She has called for a race offenders register that would see people barred from jobs based on having been accused of microaggressions in the workplace, saying the list would be similar to the sex offenders register, which is used to bar pedophiles from professions like teaching. Speaking to the Mail last year, she called for a race offenders register that would see people barred from jobs based on having been accused of microaggressions. Okay. As one of my correspondents pointed out, Diane Abbott used this as an excuse to rail at men, male violence against women. Okay. 3 a.m., the party in Peckham. As my correspondent said, there was nothing stopping her, from having curled up with some hot cocoa and a book, several hours earlier before going to sleep. Instead, she was at a raucous party in Peckham at 3 a.m. in the morning. Of course, this does not excuse the attack on her, but it's not the sort of place that one would seek out if one were seeking to avoid violence, potentially deadly violence. So let's talk about what's racist now. Well, of course, everything. Steve Siller says, the handy woke wine generator app must be up to release 3.1 by now. That's judging by the exhaustiveness with which all possible anti-racist cliches are deployed in this article in, wait for it, Bicycling. Cycling and the power of white privilege. Anti-racist efforts within cycling must move beyond the euphemisms of inclusion, diversity, sensitivity, and allyship, and begin to seriously consider the dimensions of power at play. This is by a man who is called P. Khalil Saucier. Yes, that's right. He begins when George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others were killed by the police in 2020, forcing the nation into a, wait for it, racial reckoning. The cycling industry responded with promises to be part of the solution rather than the problem. How are they part of the problem? Selling bicycles? Fuji announced it was suspending the sale of their bikes to police departments while various other industry leaders committed themselves to increasing diversity in the sport of cycling. This fellow is a professor of Black Studies at an American university. He is clearly not a black man. He appears to be some sort of Arab-French mix. But I guess he counts. But there's more. There's more, and it is in science magazines, of all places. There's an endless number of these, but these are just two that I was directed to when the formerly highly respected English magazine Nature from May the 19th. This is an editorial. Tackling systemic racism requires the system of science to change. In response to the global Black Lives Matter protests, many institutions pledged actions to combat racism. That's not enough. Next week marks a year since the murder of George Floyd and nearly a year since the Black Lives Matter protests compelled numerous institutions, including many in research, to acknowledge systemic racism. These events made universities, institutes, corporations, museums, societies, publishers, and funders confront racial injustice in a way that had never happened before. As part of that response, Nature recognized systemic racism in science and our part in it and committed to stand against it. We know that such statements must be followed by actions. At Nature, we have made it an editorial priority to expose and tackle racism in science by publishing more research, commentary, and journalism about racism and racial injustice. Next year, we will produce a special issue under the guidance of a group of external editors that examines systemic racism in research. We will be launching a news internship for Black journalists later this year. We are taking further steps to diversify our authors, viewers, and contributors. And we know that too few of our editorial staff are people of color, so we're working to change this. No, resign. If you are a white person, particularly a white male on the staff or a contributor of Nature, you should resign and be replaced by a person of color. If you're not willing to do that, you should just shut the hell up. Here's something from the same day. This is by Danielle Kilgo. Media bias delegitimizes Black rights protesters. Linguistic analyses show that powerful sources and sensationalist terms have long dominated coverage of civil rights protests. I don't know whether you've heard of the linguistic analysis. I first came across it, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when a British Columbian writer was dragged before the BC Human Rights Tribunal. So they brought in experts in linguistic analysis to prove that his writings were hateful and that the newspaper that he wrote for must be punished. And the linguistics analysis demonstrated that this fellow's writing was particularly subtle, which, wait for it, made it even more dangerous. Oh, yes, global reckoning. There we go. It was the result of decades of work by advocates who prepared the public to engage with race and racism. One reason their message has taken so long to become mainstream lies in how the press typically covers protests. This woman's stupid, or she is a liar. We have been inundated with stories about racial prejudice, racial injustice, etc. in the United States since the 1950s, without end. Without end. Oh, and this just came up last year, did it? And again, America had a Black president for 8 years. What did he do about this? Why isn't he out there forcing, why hasn't he been forced to apologize for his lack of action on this? How come Joe Biden hasn't been made to apologize? Joe Biden was rabbiting on today about hate, so much hate in the United States. Well, as the Chinese have figured out, this makes it impossible, virtually, for the Biden administration to make much of a fuss about all the horrors going on in China, because America is just chock full of hate. Yes, all these pictures of cities on fire and people looting and such like. This delegitimizes Black rights protesters. Is that what's going on there? Is this a Black rights movement? A five-fingered discount? Arguable that it's not. It's a story for John Derbyshire at VDARE. Third on the Cultural Revolution Going list, Richard Cohen. Cohen is a British nonfiction author with half a dozen well-regarded books to his credit. His latest one, to be published in Britain next month, is about historians, titled The History Makers, 2,500 Years of Shaping the Past. This is a big, thick, heavy book, 780 pages. It is, according to the British publisher, an epic exploration of who writes about the past and how the biases of certain storytellers continue to influence our ideas about history and about who we are today. Sounds like a good book. It's not good enough for the American publisher, Random House, though. Why not? Because there aren't enough Black historians in it. When Random House first told him that, Cohen scrambled to improve his text. He wrote another 18,000 words, that's 40-odd additional pages, about Black historians like Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois, and even Leo Africanus, who was a 16th century Berber diplomat and author who wrote historical pieces on the Maghreb and Nile Valley. Of course, Frederick Douglass was not a historian. Booker T. Washington was also included in this book. And if you listen to my live stream, you will know of my tremendous admiration for Booker T. Washington, but he was not a historian. So since there weren't many Black historians until fairly recently, what this means is that the very profession of history itself is illegitimate. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, as they say. Here's a story from revolver.news. Care and Feeding is Slate.com's regular parenting column. Given Slate's readership, the column has published letters about 11-year-old transgender children and teen polyamorous dating. But recently, the publication published a stunning letter from a parent on the topic of her daughter's education. I'm a liberal, white, upper-middle-class parent, and we live in a mixed-income, racially integrated urban neighborhood. When it came time to enroll our daughter in high school, we selected a school that was majority Black because it was close by, and we rejected the notion of getting caught up in which magnet school was most prestigious. Our daughter had a horrible time there. She was harassed so much that we had to pull her out, and other non-Black students there were victimized because of their race. I'm struggling to make sense of the experience." And she goes on. So, what was the response from Jamila Lemieux of Slate? It's her fault. It's her fault that her daughter was brutalized because they're white and they shouldn't be living around Black people. Now, of course, whites have been blamed in the United States many times and are still blamed today for apparently fleeing from Black people. So when white people live among Black people, that's bad. When they don't, that's bad too. Oh, and the word gentrification is used. Oh, safe space as well. Apparently the very presence of white people, even a 15-year-old girl, is so offensive to the idea of a Black space that anything that happened to this girl, she deserved. Now, I mentioned William Briggs, an essay that he wrote a couple of weeks ago, that he thinks that this is all coming to a head, that there's going to be some sort of, incident of somebody or some group of people snapping. I agree with him that it's clearly unavoidable. From John Nolte at Breitbart, "I feel zero sympathy for the people of St. Louis, none. Just last month, amid a soaring murder rate, the highest murder rate in 50 years, as well as the highest in the country, the idiots of St. Louis still voted to elect a Democrat as mayor, a lunatic named Tishara Jones, who made no secret of her desire to make things worse, much worse. The mayor wants to defund the police department and shut down a city jail. She had campaigned on a promise to enact progressive criminal justice reforms. The head of the city's corrections department is also on his way out. Jones announced his resignation last week, saying she hadn't requested he step down, but making clear she wasn't satisfied with how he ran things." The homicide rate in St. Louis is 87 per 100,000. How bad is that? Well, second place is Democrat-run Baltimore with 57 per 100,000. The ridiculously dangerous mayor actually says she does not believe additional police will have any effect on the crime and murder rates. More police doesn't prevent crime, the 49-year-old Harvard-educated mayor told The Telegraph last week. Research done in the police department shows that 50% of calls can be answered by someone other than police. You mean like that call? That fellow who set his house on fire and then shot his family? Send out some social workers to deal with that? I wonder if they really believe this. Oh, and here's some news from California. I've touched on this before, but California is, at least San Francisco and Los Angeles, increasing an open-air lunatic asylum. This is from George Anderson in Retail Wire. Recent reports depict a battle going on in San Francisco between retailers and organized retail crime, and the thieves are winning so convincingly that the stores are closing their doors rather than trying to keep up a losing fight. The New York Times reports that the city's Board of Supervisors heard last week from representative of Walgreens, who said that the number of thefts at its San Francisco locations was 4 times that of the average for the chain across the U.S. The drugstore giant has closed 17 stores in recent years, largely as a result of being unable to curtail profit-destroying thefts. Brendan Dugan, a director of the Organized Retail Crime and Corporate Investigations at CVS Health, told the Times that San Francisco is one of the most troublesome markets in the country for the retailer when it comes to thefts at stores. And there's a reason for this, that essentially stealing up to $950 is no longer a crime in California. The threat of violence has led CVS to instruct its store security personnel to refrain from pursuing suspected thieves. Dugan said the chain has seen its security officers assaulted on a pretty regular basis in the city. There appears to be plenty of blame to go around when it comes to organized retail crime run amok in San Francisco, from limited legal consequences for first-time and repeat offenders and the lucrative nature of the illegal trading, primarily done via online platforms such as eBay. Is that really going to bring in so much money? I saw a video at a CVS, a bunch of people looting a drugstore of makeup. And it was black people doing the looting, and there was a black security guard, and he made a half-hearted effort to get involved, but it would have been 5 against 1. So he prudently removed himself, and you can just see them, these people just shoveling all these cosmetics into bags. And a woman dressed in rather garish African outfit claimed that she had been injured in the melee and was planning to sue the drugstore. What's happening in San Francisco has been noticed in England. There's a story from 2 days ago by Nathan Place in The Independent. Shoplifting in San Francisco is so out of control that retailers are closing stores. Among the many problems plaguing San Francisco in recent years, business leaders say that one has become so commonplace that residents barely notice it: shoplifting. Police agree that the stealing has become endemic. The one trend we are seeing is more violence and escalating and much more bold, said Commander Raj Vaswani of the San Francisco Police Department. We see a lot of repeat offenders. Even more shocking is the fact that many shoplifters then sell their stolen goods on the street, often not far from the store where they stole them. For example, the Walgreens at 30th Street and Mission Street reported 16 shoplifting incidents from November 2020 to February 2021. Just 6 blocks away at 24th and Mission, a city official said he saw Walgreens products being sold at an outdoor market. Half of Walgreens was on the sidewalk. I'm not kidding. Asha Safai, a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, told the New York Times, "I was blown away. I've never seen anything like it in this city." Meanwhile, local residents are angry at the stores. When a Walgreens that had had 18 stealing incidents in 4 months announced it was closing, a group of citizens started a petition demanding that it remain open. Yeah, a variation on the joke used against us. Well, why don't you open your own drugstore chain then? Walgreens has annual revenue of about $139.5 billion, the petitioners wrote. We think they can afford to keep needed stores like this open. In the middle of a pandemic and crisis, we cannot allow profit-driven, greedy corporations to further traumatize and abandon their responsibility to the community. Shame on Walgreens. Well, it just goes to show that being rich doesn't make you smart. Because the people in San Francisco seem to be extraordinarily stupid. And, okay, let's get to, I'll go to the chat, then I'll talk about the new kowtowing. Tom Anderson says, quite the theory of everything they have concocted. Nope, not even Michael Kinsley or Mickey Kaus have kids at Slate. Quachilango. You know, when Slate began and Michael Kinsley was the first editor, it was quite an entertaining publication with all sorts of interesting writers from around the world. It hasn't been that way for a long time, though. This is a serious sense of entitlement, says Steve. Yes, Cochilango says, this is the Brazil. Steve says, although I feel bad for old people who have to walk to nearby stores for everything. Well, I don't know. We're just going to see more and more people ordering everything from Amazon. But then, of course, your Amazon boxes get stolen from your front porch or, in front of your apartment. Do they not? I've seen quite a few videos of this. Cecil Henry says racially integrated to what exactly? Can anyone opt out? Chogokin 666 says, as if any of us vote for these policies the oligarchs and political machines decided upon. Again, Chogokin 666, do not like this rhetoric. I feel tremendous sympathy for the people of St. Louis, the ones who didn't vote for this. That's true enough, but again, it is really quite damning when people in places like San Francisco and St. Louis or Chicago. Just Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, is really getting into it with the police there. Hugh Kenner once wrote that there was a aesthetic component to politics, and he was commenting on Richard Nixon's political career, essentially making the argument that Nixon was too ugly to be in politics, particularly at a national level. And I look at Lori Lightfoot, and I have to think that people would be afraid to be in the same room with her, because they're all thinking that at some point she is going to say, "I will eat your soul," because that's what she looks like. Cecil Henry says, "Nice to see you back. Kevin, the writer referred to as a known bully on the road. When he was criticized, he went to the racism card. Any objections to the racism card? Of course, also racism." Well, no, I mean, this is, it's unsupportable. Again, you cannot have a situation where an exceedingly powerful minority, tail that wags the dog, as it were, says we can't live with white people and we can't live without white people. It's just, it's going to break down. Just the question is, how much is going to be destroyed before reality is reasserted? Yes. John Cena, or Senna, he's an actor, formerly a professional wrestler. This is from Mark Moore at the New York Post. The apology came fast and furious, ho ho. Former professional wrestler turned actor John Cena, I'm going to pronounce it that way, who appeared in Fast and Furious 9, apologized on Tuesday to his Chinese audience for referring to Taiwan as a country, saying, quote, "I'm very, very sorry about my mistake. I apologize. I'm very sorry," unquote. In an interview with a Taiwanese broadcaster to promote the F9 film, Senna, speaking Mandarin, said Taiwan is the first country that can watch F9, sparking a firestorm of criticism in one of Hollywood's largest international markets. His comments triggered immediate backlash in China, which considers Taiwan a self-governing island state, part of its territory. He posted a video on the Chinese social media site Weibo saying he's sorry. "Hi, China. I'm John Cena. I'm in the middle of Fast and Furious 9 promotions. I'm doing a lot of interviews. I made a mistake in one of my interviews. I made one mistake. I have to say something very, very important now. I love and respect China and Chinese people. I'm very, very sorry about my mistake." This is verbatim. I apologize. I'm very sorry. You must understand that I really love, really respect China and the Chinese people. My apologies. See you." However, many Chinese netizens were unsatisfied with the gesture because Senna stopped short of saying that Taiwan is part of China. Oh, of course, the groveling is never enough. Senna, who learned Mandarin to help his wrestling promotions in China, has more than 600,000 followers on Weibo. Okay. The Chinese can do whatever they want with regard to this. They can claim that, Taiwan is an integral part of their territory. But why we put up with it is another question. We need to decouple from that country. We're increasingly deciding what we are allowed to say and what we are not allowed to say about Taiwan and all manner of other things. Trade, between the West and China has been exceedingly one-sided. We get a bunch of cheap tat, and they are on course to becoming the richest country on Earth and the most militarily powerful country on Earth, who are now threatening the government of Australia with regard to the Taiwan situation, effectively telling other countries that you had better not be on America's side in this dispute, or you will pay. Yes, news from Scotland. Some news from Scotland, from the Daily Mail. The Scottish Nationalist Party accused of fantasy economics over Scottish independence blueprint that opens the door to decriminalizing all drug use and introducing a universal basic income while backing tax increases to help fight climate change. Oh, also looser immigration policy. Billed as a blueprint, a route map to a more socially just Scotland. It includes recommendations on drug decriminalization, new green taxes, looser immigration rules, the introduction of a UBI. So this is going to be the new Scotland, apparently. A bunch of druggies on the dole, and they're not even going to be Scottish. Do you know that the Scottish people are the fattest people in Europe? I learned that a few years ago. I was rather surprised, but, I'd heard of deep-fried Mars bars, so I suppose I shouldn't be. Of course, the Scots were considered for the longest time to be the most industrious people in Europe. Perhaps the independence from England will knock some sense into them. But we're all infected to one degree or another. And just in case you hadn't heard enough about the Canadian military and what a joke it has become, this is from a website called taskandpurpose.com, which is it's about the military, for people in the military. Canadian troops were going to fire artillery, then they got high. The cupcakes tasted different, to say the least. Paul Sloldra. This is from yesterday. Troops in Canada were going to fire artillery July the 21st, 2018, and they got high. That's essentially what happened to soldiers assigned to W Battery of the Royal Regiment of the Canadian Artillery School, who were scheduled to conduct a live fire training joint on that clear summer day in Gagetown, New Brunswick, according to court documents. But plans changed after a soldier named Chelsea Cogswell allegedly baked weed-infused cupcakes and handed them out to several soldiers to mark the occasions. Is this part of military tradition in Canada now? Handing out cupcakes before live fire exercises? All the members of W Battery who consumed the cupcakes, except one, allegedly experienced symptoms which included dehydration, overheating, fatigue, confusion, dry mouth, and paranoia, court documents state. Several affected members were allegedly unable to properly execute safe weapons and explosive handling drills. That afternoon, the affected members were treated by a medical technician and the military police were called. Let's hope that the medical technician treated them with a healthy serving of poutine, considering that the most common side effects of using marijuana are feeling sleepy, happy, or hungry, or becoming psychotic, actually. Cogswell, a bombardier, the equivalent of a corporal in the U.S. Army, who was working in the canteen that day, has been hit with 18 charges, including administering a noxious thing and neglect to the prejudice of good order and discipline. Prosecutors say Cogswell prepared the dank cupcakes and gave them to her unsuspecting colleagues. So it finally happened. We have the first known example of Canadian soldiers getting stoned on duty about 3 years after our northern neighbors began allowing service members to consume marijuana in their free time. But as court documents show, the incident occurred months before the policy change, and perhaps more importantly, getting colleagues stoned without their knowledge remains a no-no. A review of our court-martial records indicate that this is the first time a member has faced a court-martial for allegedly administering cannabis to colleagues without their consent, according to a Canadian military spokesperson. The Canadian military outlined new marijuana-related rules in October 2018 following the country's legalization of recreational use for its citizens. Well, not just its citizens. The new policy allowed Canadian service members to consume the chronic at least 8 hours before duty, 24 hours before the operation of weapons or vehicles, or 28 days before high-altitude skydives, military flights, or operations in a hyperbaric environment. Yes, certainly sounds like a fantastic idea, allowing soldiers to get high before they go to work. But, Canadian military, it has no purpose. That's not hyperbole. It literally has no purpose. It's just a big experimental lab and a pipeline for PTSD and sexual abuse lawsuits. It's very, very expensive, despite the fact that Again, it has no purpose. I'll talk about this Kellogg story and Alphabet People tomorrow, but I just wanted to mention something briefly before the show ends. That I'm a fan of the video review series, Red Letter Media. And so today they released a video which was a review of Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead. We just got all over Zack Snyder mania for his revamped Justice League movie. This movie was revamped too because there was a comedian in it who was canceled. And then they found another comedian who was, a lesbian woman, so she's pretty safe. And then they filmed her in front of a green screen for all her scenes at the cost of a lot of money. And I was reminded of Mike Judge's film Idiocracy in this review, that there are dead pixels in the film. And everyone who's seen it, including the men at Red Letter Media, they thought that there was, maybe they were going crazy or there was something wrong with their TV sets, because how can you have dead pixels in a movie that costs $90 million? You fix that in post, right? But the other thing that struck me is that, this movie, it just seems to be pointless. It has no plot to speak of, and what plot doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely interminable. It would be otiose to speak about acting in it. There are zombies and there are explosions. Now, that's not quite the Academy Award-winning film in Idiocracy ass, but we're certainly getting there. We're certainly getting there. I don't really understand the fascination with zombies. I like 28 Days Later because, the rage monsters, that was something new. That was clever. But zombies are very slow and they're very stupid. I understand they operate in numbers. But yes. Oh, and it takes place in Vegas. And the movie is a total ripoff of Aliens. James Cameron's Aliens, which is not as good a movie as Alien, but is still a pretty good movie, which Sigourney Weaver carries on her back. But they just show example after example where this movie is ripping off Aliens. Because apparently, I don't know, it's just, we got a Friends reboot, we got a Gossip Girl reboot, we have a Sex and the City reboot. Ideas, we don't need ideas. Every single possible idea for a movie apparently has already been done. So we can just, reboot or soft reboot or whatever, all the movies from the past, or we can just throw something together about zombies and explosions and Las Vegas. Let's have a look at. I looked at the reviews for this, and the reviews were pretty good. And I thought, movie reviewing is not the same thing as movie criticism. And the people who, those newspapers that still hire movie reviewers, it's well known in the profession that people don't like to read bad reviews. Most people don't like to read bad reviews. They find it depressing. Why are you telling me about something that is bad, right? The pressure on these reviewers to say good things, nice things about terrible movies has apparently become relentless. Hello to Aslan, and Gamayan likes 28 Days Later as well. Okay. Okay, Aslan has a story for us. Ogan's Iron says KMG soldiers who will be used to guard Canadian civilians don't need to be very alert. Tom Anderson says the purpose of the Canadian military is to provide jobs for people who can't get into college. Don't smoke cigarettes on your break at work. That's bad for you. You should instead spend every waking hour smoking marijuana like a healthy person does, says respectable commenting name. Ironically, that it's an interesting point that you bring up, because an increasing number of institutions and companies are saying that they will not hire people who smoke cigarettes. I mean, not at work, but on their own time. Marijuana stays in a person's body for a very long time. It also makes people stupider, less alert. And as Alex Berenson has demonstrated at great length in his book about marijuana, Tell Your Children, that the incredible power of the latest doses of marijuana, particularly these edibles, is leading to psychotic freakouts, leading to murder. So stay away from the drugs, kiddies. That's the show for today. Thank you all for tuning in. What's coming up on the show on Theater Thursday? I'm going to discuss an excellent movie directed by Peter Yates, who of course made Bullet and who made Breaking Away, which is one of my very favorite movies. It's called The Friends of Eddie Coyle, and it's based on a novel by George Higgins. And I'm going to be talking about Cultured Drugs by Ed Chang, John Chapman Borzoy on Friday. I find it quite compelling, actually. If you like the show, any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be exceedingly appreciated at this uncertain time in my life, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations can be made directly to this live stream via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.